At 38 years old, I ended my marriage and everyone thought they knew why. There was no cheating, no abuse, no explosive drama. The truth is far more complicated and probably more common than you might imagine. This is the story of how I found the courage to admit that loving someone isn't always enough, and why leaving can sometimes be the bravest act of love you'll ever do. When I tell people I left my marriage at 38, I always see the same expression on their faces. There's a split second where their eyes widen slightly, and I can almost see the questions forming in their minds. He must have cheated. Maybe there was violence, money problems, addiction. People always search for a dramatic reason, an explanation that fits neatly into the narratives we're fed about why marriages end. They want a villain in the story, someone to blame, something concrete they can point to and say, yes, that makes sense. That justifies such a drastic decision. But the truth is much quieter and somehow more painful than any of those assumptions. My marriage didn't end with a bang. It ended with a whisper, with the slow realization that two good people can create something that doesn't work. That sometimes love transforms into something else entirely without either person doing anything particularly wrong. We didn't fight constantly. We didn't hate each other. In fact, we still cared deeply about one another. That's what made leaving so incredibly difficult and so impossible to explain to people who expected a simple, dramatic reason. I met my husband when I was 27. He was everything that looked right on paper. Stable career, kind to his family, made me laugh, shared similar values. Our friends said we were perfect together. Our families adored us as a couple. We got married at 30, and for the first few years, everything seemed fine. Not extraordinary, but fine. Comfortable. Safe. We had routines and inside jokes and a mortgage and plans for the future. From the outside, we probably looked like any successful married couple navigating life together. But somewhere around year 5, I started noticing something. I felt like I was disappearing, not in a dramatic, sudden way, but gradually, like a photograph left too long in the sun, slowly fading until you can barely make out what the image used to be. I had become so focused on being a good wife, on maintaining our household, on supporting his career, on meeting everyone's expectations of what our marriage should look like, that I had stopped asking myself what I actually wanted from my own life. I remember the exact moment I realized something was deeply wrong. We were at a dinner party with friends, and someone asked me about my hobbies, what I did for fun. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't remember the last time I had done something purely because it brought me joy. I had given up painting because it felt selfish to spend money on art supplies when we were saving for a house. I had stopped seeing certain friends because my husband found them too loud or too opinionated. I had let go of small dreams and passions one by one, telling myself it was just part of growing up, part of being married, part of being responsible. My husband wasn't a monster who demanded these sacrifices. He never explicitly told me to give up anything. But our relationship had settled into patterns where his comfort, his preferences, his career always seemed to take priority. And I had gone along with it because that's what I thought good wives did. I had made myself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into the shape of the person I thought I needed to be to make our marriage work. The conversations we had were surface level. We talked about groceries and bills and what to watch on television. We had stopped really seeing each other years ago. When I tried to share something I was thinking about or struggling with, I could see his eyes glaze over slightly, not because he was cruel, but because we had lost the ability to truly connect. We were roommates who occasionally had sex, going through the motions of a marriage without the depth and intimacy that makes it meaningful. I started therapy around age 35, telling myself it was just to deal with work stress. But week after week, my sessions kept circling back to my marriage, to this growing sense of emptiness, to the person I used to be and the person I had become. My therapist asked me a question that changed everything. She said, "If you could design your ideal life, what would it look like?" And I realized with devastating clarity that my husband wasn't in that picture. Not because I hated him or wanted to hurt him, but because the life I wanted to live and the person I wanted to become didn't align with the life we had built together. I spent almost 2 years wrestling with this realization. I kept trying to convince myself that every marriage goes through rough patches, that boredom is normal, that I was being selfish or unrealistic. Society tells us that marriage requires sacrifice and compromise. It tells us that butterflies fade and passion cools, and that's just what happens. It tells us to stay for the children, stay for the finances, stay because leaving means failure. I internalized all of those messages and tried desperately to make them true for me. But there's a difference between normal compromise and losing yourself completely. There's a difference between passion cooling and feeling nothing at all. There's a difference between rough patches and fundamental incompatibility. And I had crossed from one side of those lines to the other without fully realizing it was happening. The conversation where I told him I wanted a divorce was the hardest thing I've ever done. He was shocked. From his perspective, everything was fine. We didn't fight. We had a nice house. We had plans. He asked me what he had done wrong, and the terrible truth was that he hadn't done anything specifically wrong. He had been exactly who he always was. I was the one who had changed, who had grown in directions that no longer fit with our life together, who had finally found the courage to admit that staying was slowly killing the person I was meant to become. People judged me harshly. His family certainly did. Even some of my own family members questioned my decision. Friends who I thought would understand told me I was throwing away a good thing, that all marriages have problems, that I would regret leaving someone who loved me. What they didn't understand, what I struggled to articulate, was that staying would have been the greater betrayal, not just to myself, but to him as well. He deserved someone who wanted the life he wanted, someone who felt fulfilled and happy in the marriage we had created. I couldn't be that person anymore, no matter how hard I tried. The divorce process was painful, but not bitter. We divided our assets fairly. We were kind to each other even as we were ending our partnership. People found this confusing. How could we be so civil if the marriage was truly over? But that's exactly the point. The end of our marriage wasn't about anger or hatred. It was about acknowledgement. We had to acknowledge that what we had wasn't enough for either of us, even if he hadn't fully realized it yet. Now, 3 years later at 41, I'm rebuilding my life from scratch. I moved to a smaller apartment that I decorated exactly how I wanted. I took up painting again and joined an art class. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones who share my interests and values. I changed careers to something more aligned with my passions, even though it meant less money. I traveled alone for the first time in my life. I started saying yes to things that scared me and no to things that didn't serve me. Some days are still hard. Divorce is a grief process even when you're the one who initiated it. I grieve the future we had planned, the family we never created, the dreams we shared before they stopped fitting. I grieve the time I lost being someone I wasn't. I occasionally wonder if I made a mistake, if I should have tried harder, if another year of therapy might have fixed everything. But mostly, I feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. I feel like myself again. I wake up in the morning and recognize the person looking back at me in the mirror. I make choices based on what I want and need, not just on what keeps the peace or maintains someone else's comfort. I'm learning who I am outside of being someone's wife, and that person is stronger and more interesting than I ever gave her credit for being. The reason I ended my marriage at 38 wasn't dramatic. There was no single betrayal, no explosive moment, no clear villain. I ended it because I realized that a peaceful marriage and a fulfilling life aren't always the same thing. I ended it because I understood that staying out of fear or obligation or other people's expectations was slowly erasing me. I ended it because I finally valued my own happiness and authenticity as much as I valued being a good wife. This story isn't about encouraging people to leave their marriages at the first sign of difficulty. It's about recognizing the difference between normal challenges that couples can work through together and fundamental incompatibilities that no amount of trying can fix. It's about understanding that love alone isn't always enough if you've lost yourself in the process. It's about giving yourself permission to choose your own life, even when that choice disappoints or confuses other people. If you're reading this and something resonates, if you see yourself in my story, I want you to know that your feelings are valid. Questioning your marriage doesn't make you selfish or ungrateful. Wanting more from your life doesn't make you a bad person. And choosing to leave a marriage that isn't working, even if there's no dramatic reason, doesn't make you a failure. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit the truth and have the courage to start over, even when the world expects you to stay and suffer in silence. Your life is yours to live, and you deserve to live it fully as yourself.